The warehouse in Southwark smelled of damp wool and desperation. Charlotte Brennan stood with her spine straight and her chin elevated, though her hands trembled where she'd clasped them before her. Around her, potential employers. She refused to think of them as buyers, though that's precisely what they were, circled like carrion birds assessing prey. "Open your mouth, girl." A portly man in a merchant's coat gestured impatiently. "Let me see your teeth." Charlotte's jaw tightened, but she complied. 6 months ago, she had been Miss Charlotte Brennan, daughter of a respected solicitor. 6 months ago, she had sat in drawing rooms and embroidered by windows and believed the world contained some measure of justice. Her father's sudden death had taught her otherwise. His widow, Charlotte's stepmother of merely 3 years, had wasted no time in revealing her true nature. "Healthy enough," the merchant muttered, running a practiced eye over her frame as though she were a mare at auction. "But 22 is rather old for a household servant. What skills does she possess?" "She reads and writes," Georgiana Brennan answered from her position near the warehouse entrance, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief that remained conspicuously dry. "She has been educated beyond her station, I'm afraid. My late husband was far too indulgent, but she is biddable enough when properly supervised." The lie sat bitter in Charlotte's throat. Biddable. She had been called stubborn, willful, impossible, never biddable. It was why Georgiana had orchestrated this particular revenge. A quick marriage to some elderly tradesman would have been kinder. This slow erasure of personhood, this reduction to commodity, this was cruelty refined to art. 10 years of service seems excessive, another voice observed. This one belonged to a thin woman with calculating eyes. "What are the terms if she proves unsatisfactory?" "No refunds," Georgiana said quickly. "The girl's father left considerable debts. This is the only way to satisfy his creditors. Once the contract is signed, she is yours until the term expires or—" She paused delicately. "Until death, should that come first." Charlotte's nails bit into her palms. Lies. All lies. Her father had been meticulous with accounts, but Georgiana had presented forged documents to the magistrate, and Charlotte, young, female, and without independent means, had possessed no legal standing to contest them. The law saw her as her stepmother's ward until she married. Georgiana had simply chosen to interpret wardship rather creatively. The warehouse door opened, admitting a gust of November wind and a figure that commanded immediate attention despite the dimness. Charlotte noticed him peripherally, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in clothes that suggested wealth without ostentation. He moved with the quiet confidence of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Edmund Hartley, Earl of Ashford, had not planned to enter this particular establishment. He'd been investigating rumors of illegal indenture contracts on behalf of a parliamentary committee when his informant had mentioned the warehouse in Southwark. The Earl possessed both a keen sense of justice and a personal revulsion for any transaction that treated human beings as property. His mother had been sold into marriage for her dowry. He'd watched her fade like watercolor left in rain. Now, surveying the scene before him, his expression hardened into something glacial. His gaze found Charlotte immediately. Not because she was beautiful, though she was, in a subdued way that suggested roses before they bloomed. No, what arrested him was her posture. Every other person in the warehouse either cowered or postured. This young woman simply endured, with a dignity so profound it seemed to create a sphere of silence around her. "How much?" The Earl's voice cut through the merchant's haggling. Every head turned. Georgiana's eyes widened in recognition. Even she knew the Earl of Ashford by sight, then narrowed in calculation. The merchant and the thin woman stepped back instinctively, recognizing superior predation. "My lord," Georgiana began, her voice dripping false deference. "What an unexpected honor. I'm afraid this is a private family matter." "How much for the contract?" Edmund repeated, his tone suggesting he would not ask a third time. £200 for 10 years of service, the merchant interjected, sensing opportunity. She's educated, healthy, and… 500, Edmund said flatly, on the condition that every other interested party leaves immediately. The sum was obscene. The merchant's eyes gleamed. Sold, my lord. I'll have the papers drawn up. The papers already exist. I'll purchase whatever fraudulent document you're peddling, and then I'll have my solicitor determine exactly how illegal this entire operation is. Edmund's gaze swept the room with contempt. Leave, now. The warehouse emptied with remarkable speed. Only Georgiana remained, clutching her reticule and attempting one final gambit. My lord, you must understand, the girl is unstable, prone to hysteria. I only agreed to this arrangement because… Madam. Edmund's voice could have frozen the Thames. Take your money and go before I have you arrested for fraud. Georgiana went. Charlotte stood motionless through the entire exchange, her mind struggling to process what had occurred. She'd been purchased. No, the fiction of purchase maintained itself. By a man she'd never met. The Earl of Ashford, if the whispers were accurate. The wealthiest peer in England, whose fortune in railway investments dwarfed most ducal estates. Miss Brennan. He approached carefully, as one might a startled animal. I apologize for the necessity of participating in that charade. If you'll accompany me, we can discuss your situation somewhere less. He glanced at the dingy warehouse with distaste. Demeaning. Charlotte found her voice, though it emerged rougher than intended. Am I to thank you, my lord, for purchasing what should never have been for sale? Something flickered in his dark eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or respect. No, you are not. His carriage waited outside, a gleaming black vehicle with the Ashford crest emblazoned on the door. Edmund handed her inside with the same careful courtesy he might show a duchess. Charlotte sank into upholstery finer than any she'd touched since her father's death, and felt the absurdity of her situation crash over her like a wave. The Earl settled opposite her. As the carriage lurched into motion, he said quietly, I did not buy you, Miss Brennan. I bought a fraudulent contract which I intend to have declared void. Until my solicitor can untangle the legalities, I'm offering you sanctuary at Ashford Hall. You will be treated as a guest, not a servant. Charlotte stared at her hands. And after the legalities are resolved? That will be entirely your decision. She looked up sharply, searching his face for deception. She found only exhaustion and something that might have been old grief. You'll forgive me, my lord, if I find that difficult to believe. Men don't spend £500 without expecting returns. Some men, he agreed, but my mother was sold for her dowry. I watched it kill her by inches. I have no intention of replicating that particular crime. The statement, delivered in his level baritone, silenced whatever retort Charlotte had prepared. They traveled in silence through London's darkening streets, past neighborhoods that grew progressively more elegant as they moved northwest. Charlotte recognized the shift to Mayfair, then watched as even that exclusive district gave way to open countryside. Ashford Hall materialized through the dusk like something from a Gothic novel. All stone and sweeping terraces, windows glowing with welcoming light. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was another cage, albeit gilded. A housekeeper materialized at the entrance, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and capable hands. Mrs. Copeland, Edmund said, this is Miss Charlotte Brennan. She'll be staying with us indefinitely. Please prepare the Rose bedroom and ensure she has everything she requires. Mrs. Copeland assessed Charlotte in one shrewd glance, and whatever she saw there softened her expression. Of course, my lord. Miss Brennan, if you'll follow me. Charlotte followed, because what else could she do? Behind her, she heard Edmund give quiet instructions to a footman about contacting his solicitor immediately. The kindness felt like another weight. The Rose bedroom was aptly named. Everything was done in shades of blush and cream, from the carpet to the bed hangings. A fire crackled in the grate. Hot water steamed in a copper tub behind a screen. It was more luxury than Charlotte had experienced in 6 months. Mrs. Copeland lingered at the door. "Ring if you need anything, miss. Anything at all." His lordship gave strict instructions that you're to be treated as an honored guest. When the door finally closed, Charlotte sank onto the bed and allowed herself, for the first time since her father's funeral, to weep. Not from gratitude, not from relief, but from the exhausting, soul-crushing uncertainty of still not knowing whether she was free or simply more prettily imprisoned. 3 days passed before Charlotte ventured beyond her room except for brief, furtive excursions to the water closet. Mrs. Copeland brought trays 3 times daily, beautifully prepared meals that Charlotte barely touched. The housekeeper never scolded, merely replaced untouched food with fresh offerings and murmured reassurances that no one expected anything of her. On the evening of the 3rd day, Edmund climbed the stairs himself. He'd instructed his staff not to pressure their guest, but concern gnawed at him. He knocked gently. "Miss Brennan, may I enter?" A pause, then, "It's your house, my lord." He opened the door to find her seated in the window embrasure, a book open in her lap, her profile silhouetted against the last rays of sunset. She looked ethereal and utterly exhausted. "You haven't been downstairs," he observed, remaining near the doorway. "I've been reading. Your library seems extensive, based on the volumes Mrs. Copeland has brought me." "It is. You're welcome to use it. You're welcome," he added with emphasis, "to use any part of this house." Charlotte finally turned to look at him directly. "When will you tell me the price, my lord?" Edmund felt the question like a physical blow. "Price? Men don't perform grand rescues without expectation of reward. Should I anticipate your nocturnal visit? Or do you prefer gratitude demonstrated in daylight?" Her voice remained level, factual, as though discussing weather. The Earl's jaw tightened. "Miss Brennan, I understand you've been given every reason to distrust male benevolence, but I am not." He stopped, forcing composure. "There is no price. There will never be a price. I am attempting to rectify an injustice, nothing more." "How noble!" The words might have been sincere, or devastatingly sarcastic. Charlotte's expression revealed nothing. Edmund left before he could say something unfortunate. In his study, he poured whiskey he didn't drink and stared at his mother's portrait above the mantelpiece. Why did helping this woman feel like navigating a battlefield where every step might detonate? That night, unable to sleep, insomnia had plagued him since his mother's death 8 years prior. Edmund descended to his library. He stopped short upon entering. Charlotte stood before the shelves, candlestick in hand, examining titles. She startled at his arrival. "I apologize. Mrs. Copeland said I might." She was correct. Edmund moved to the sideboard and poured 2 glasses of port, offering her one. "I often read here at night. Insomnia is a tiresome companion." Charlotte accepted the glass, studying him with new curiosity. "What keeps you awake, my lord?" The question was too direct for polite society. Edmund found himself answering anyway. "Memories, regrets, the usual specters." He gestured to the portrait of a woman that hung near the window, younger than his mother's formal painting upstairs, more intimate. She was sold in marriage at 18. My father was 40 years her senior. She died when I was 23, and I've always believed she died of unhappiness. Charlotte approached the portrait, studying the delicate features, the sad eyes. "She's beautiful." She was wasted. Edmund's voice roughened. She had a talent for watercolors, a passion for botany. My father forbade both as frivolous. When she died, I found decades of sketches hidden in her chambers. Plants, gardens she'd designed in imagination only. He paused. When I saw you in that warehouse, being examined like livestock, I saw her. I saw what men do when they forget women are people. Something shifted in Charlotte's expression, not softening, precisely, but a recalibration of understanding. That's why you intervened. Yes. They stood in silence, the library's vast collection of knowledge surrounding them like protective walls. Finally, Charlotte said quietly, I apologize for my accusations earlier. I've learned to assume the worst. It's safer. You need apologize for nothing. Edmund returned his glass to the sideboard. But perhaps we might establish a truce? I have no designs on your person. You have no obligation to trust me. We simply coexist until my solicitor determines your legal standing. A truce, Charlotte repeated, tasting the word. Then, unexpectedly, she smiled. Small, fleeting, but genuine. I accept your terms, my lord. It became ritual. Each night, Edmund would descend to find Charlotte already there, curled in a leather chair with whatever volume had captured her interest. They would talk about books, about philosophy, about everything except the legal limbo that defined her existence. Edmund learned she had a subtle wit that could dismantle pompous arguments with surgical precision. Charlotte discovered the Earl possessed surprising idealism beneath his aristocratic reserve. 2 weeks after her arrival, Edmund invited her to walk the grounds. November had settled into crisp beauty, the gardens stripped bare but elegant in their austerity. Charlotte accepted, wrapped in a borrowed pelisse that Mrs. Copeland had produced from unknown sources. They walked the graveled paths in companionable silence until Edmund asked, What will you do, Miss Brennan, when the legalities are resolved? Charlotte considered the question seriously. I don't know. For years I was my father's daughter, managing his household, serving as his hostess after my mother died. Then I was briefly Georgiana's stepdaughter, which mostly involved being told my every quality was deficient. Then I was... She gestured vaguely. Whatever that warehouse made me. I've never been permitted to simply be Charlotte. Then discover who Charlotte is. Edmund stopped, turning to face her. Here, take your time. There's no hurry. Something warm unfurled in Charlotte's chest. Dangerous, this warmth. Dangerous to rely on it. Why are you being so kind? Perhaps because kindness costs me nothing and means everything to you. He smiled slightly. Or perhaps because I enjoy your company and am selfishly hoping you'll stay long enough to finish destroying my arguments about Wordsworth's superiority to Coleridge. Charlotte laughed, the first genuine laugh she'd produced in months. That won't take long, my lord. Your position is indefensible. Their debates became highlights of Edmund's days. He found himself anticipating dinner with unprecedented enthusiasm, because Charlotte would be there, dissecting social hypocrisies with an incisiveness born of experiencing them from the underside. She challenged him. She surprised him. She made him think about everything from fresh angles. One evening, as they dined across from each other in the smaller breakfast room Edmund preferred to the formal dining hall, their hands reached simultaneously for the wine decanter. Fingers brushed. Both froze. The contact lasted mere seconds, yet Edmund felt it like lightning through his veins. Charlotte withdrew her hand first, color rising in her cheeks. Forgive me. Nothing to forgive, Edmund managed, though his voice sounded foreign to his own ears. The meal continued, but something had shifted, an awareness that hummed between them like plucked strings. 3 weeks into Charlotte's residence, a letter arrived. Edmund's solicitor, Mr. Thomas Brennan, no relation to Charlotte, though the coincidence was notable, had uncovered information. Edmund found Charlotte in the library, as expected, and approached with the letter clutched in his hand. Charlotte. He'd begun using her given name in private. She'd granted permission hesitantly, as though names were precious currency. "May we speak?" She set aside her book immediately, reading tension in his posture. "What's wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Something is finally right." Edmund sat across from her, leaning forward intently. "My solicitor has finished investigating. The contract Georgiana presented was entirely fraudulent. Your father left no debts. In fact, he left a modest trust for you, approximately £5,000. Georgiana forged the debt documentation and bribed a corrupt magistrate to approve your indenture." Charlotte's face cycled through expressions: shock, fury, relief, confusion. The contract was never legal?" "You were never anything but free, Charlotte. Georgiana's crime was assuming no one would investigate." Edmund's voice hardened. "Mr. Brennan has submitted evidence to the authorities. She'll be prosecuted." Charlotte stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Her hands shook. Edmund rose but didn't approach, giving her space to process. "Weeks," she said finally, her voice tight. "I spent weeks believing I was merchandise, believing I was owned." She spun to face him. "Did you know? When you purchased that contract, did you know it was fraudulent?" Edmund met her gaze steadily. "I suspected. The circumstances were too convenient, and your stepmother's performance was unconvincing. That's why I hired Mr. Brennan immediately." "You suspected?" Charlotte's laugh was sharp, brittle. "And you kept me here, under your roof, without telling me?" "I kept you safe while the investigation proceeded," Edmund corrected. "If I'd made accusations without proof, Georgiana might have fled. Or worse, she might have attempted to reclaim you through other legal fictions. So you made the decision for me. Again." Charlotte's eyes blazed. "Do you understand, my lord, how exhausting it is to be saved? To have men, kind men, cruel men, it doesn't matter, make decisions about my life without consulting me?" Edmund felt his own temper spark. "Would you have preferred I left you in that warehouse? Allowed some genuine buyer to—" "I would have preferred truth." Charlotte's voice rose to match his. "I would have preferred being treated as an intelligent adult, capable of understanding complex situations, rather than a fragile thing to be protected and managed." "You were traumatized," Edmund shot back. "Forgive me for believing you needed time to recover before confronting additional complications." "And who gave you the authority to make that determination?" Charlotte demanded. "You say you don't own me, but you've controlled every aspect of my existence since that day. Better food, better cage. It's still a cage, my lord." The accusation landed like a slap. Edmund stood frozen, staring at this woman who'd somehow become central to his existence, and realized she was right. He'd been so focused on protecting her that he'd never asked what she actually wanted. Charlotte watched his expression shift and felt her anger deflate into exhaustion. "I'm grateful," she said quietly. "I am. But I need to make my own choices now. Even if they're mistakes. Especially if they're mistakes." Edmund's jaw worked. Finally, "What do you want?" "I want—" Charlotte stopped. What did she want? Freedom, yes. But freedom to do what? She looked around the library. This room that had become sanctuary. This house that had given her space to breathe. This man who'd challenged her mind and awakened something in her heart she'd thought Georgiana had destroyed. "I need time," she said instead. "To think." Edmund nodded stiffly. "Of course. I'll have Mrs. Copeland prepare everything you need. The £5,000 is yours. Mr. Brennan can arrange transfer—" "Stop." Charlotte's voice broke. "Please stop being so damnably reasonable." They stared at each other across the library. Outside, winter rain began pattering against the windows. Edmund looked at Charlotte, really looked at her, seeing past his own projections of rescue and redemption. And what he saw terrified him. Somewhere between rescuing her and knowing her, he'd fallen completely, irrevocably in love. Not with the victim, not with the woman who needed saving. With Charlotte, who challenged him, who made him laugh, who'd looked at his mother's portrait and understood without explanation why it mattered. And she was leaving. Because he'd been too controlling to let her choose to stay. "I'm sorry," he said finally. "You're right. About all of it. I'll have Mr. Brennan forward the documents regarding your inheritance. You're free to go whenever you wish. Or," he swallowed his pride, "or stay as long as you'd like. No expectations, no pressure, simply because you wish to." Charlotte nodded, her own throat too tight for words. She fled the library before she could do something foolish, like confess that the thought of leaving Ashford Hall felt like tearing herself in half. That night, Edmund sat alone in the library and finally acknowledged what Mrs. Copeland had been telling him for days. He was in love with a woman who saw him as another man trying to control her life. The irony was caustic. Near midnight, Mrs. Copeland entered with tea he hadn't requested. She set the tray down with pointed firmness. "Have you told her?" "Told her what?" Edmund asked wearily. "That you love her, you impossible man." Edmund's head snapped up. She'd think it was coercion, or gratitude mistaken for affection, or... "She'd think," Mrs. Copeland interrupted, "that you see her as something other than a problem to be solved." The housekeeper softened. "Miss Charlotte has been told what she is her entire life. Dutiful daughter, inconvenient stepdaughter, saleable commodity. When will someone simply tell her she's loved for who she is?" After she left, Edmund sat in darkness and wondered if he'd already lost what he'd never properly claimed. Morning brought clarity of the harsh variety. Charlotte packed her few belongings. Everything in the room belonged to the Earl. Gifts she couldn't accept without feeling beholden. She'd dress in her original gown, take nothing, owe nothing. Mrs. Copeland found her folding a borrowed nightgown. "Miss Charlotte, you mustn't—" "I must," Charlotte said gently. "Please don't make this harder." The housekeeper's eyes welled. "He's not like other men, dear girl. His lordship, he—" "I know." Charlotte's voice cracked. "That's why I have to leave. Because if I stay, I'll never know if it's real or if I'm just grateful, confused, still so tired from everything that anything kind feels like love." Mrs. Copeland grasped her hands. "What if it is love?" "Then it will still be love when I've had time to discover who I am without crisis defining me," Charlotte whispered. "And if it's not—" She couldn't finish the sentence. She descended the stairs one final time. In the entrance hall, a footman informed her that his lordship was in the library and requested a moment before she departed. Charlotte's heart hammered. She'd up a beat, hoped to avoid this final conversation. Edmund stood by the window when she entered, his back to the door. Documents littered his desk. He'd clearly been working through the night. He turned as she closed the door, and Charlotte's breath caught. He looked haggard, older than his 31 years. "You're leaving," he said. Statement, not question. "Yes." Edmund moved to his desk, gathering papers with careful precision. "I've prepared everything. The £5,000 your father left you, with 8 years of compound interest, brings the total to approximately £6,300. Additionally, Mr. Brennan calculated compensation for suffering, mental duress, and theft of property. I've added that sum." He held out a bank draft. "This is yours. It always was. My only contribution was ensuring you received what had been stolen." Charlotte approached slowly, taking the draft with numb fingers. The amount made her dizzy. This is too much. It's what you're owed. Edmund's voice remained carefully neutral. Mr. Brennan has also prepared documentation proving your father's estate was solvent and your indenture illegal. Georgiana has been arrested. She'll be prosecuted for fraud, forgery, and illegal trafficking. You need never fear her again. Thank you, Charlotte managed. Don't. The word came out harsh. Edmund softened it immediately. Please don't thank me for returning what should never have been taken. He paused. Where will you go? London, I think. Perhaps I'll rent rooms, find employment. Stay. The single word hung between them. Charlotte's eyes flew to his face. Edmund looked at her with naked vulnerability. Stay, he repeated. Not as a guest. Not as someone I rescued. As... He stopped, gathering courage. I'm doing this badly. Doing what badly? Charlotte's heart raced. Edmund abandoned his position behind the desk, crossing to stand before her. Close, but not touching. I told you there was no price for my help. I meant it. But I didn't anticipate that you would become... He struggled for words. Every night in the library, every debate about poetry, every time you challenged me or made me laugh or looked at me as though I were more than my title. Charlotte, I didn't anticipate falling in love. The world tilted. Charlotte stared at him, searching for deception and finding only terrified sincerity. You... What? I love you, Edmund said, his voice rough. Not because I saved you, not because you're grateful. I love you because you're brilliant and fierce and you see through everyone's pretenses, including mine. I love you because when you smile, really smile, not the polite mask, it feels like sunlight. I love you because you make me want to be better than I am. Charlotte's throat closed. How can you know? We've only known each other a month. I know, because for the first time since my mother died, I'm afraid. Edmund's dark eyes held hers. I'm afraid of losing you. Not because I need to save you, because I need you. Selfishly, desperately. In ways that have nothing to do with chivalry and everything to do with wanting to wake beside you every morning and debate with you every evening and simply exist in your presence. Edmund. Charlotte whispered his name for the first time. You don't have to answer now, he said quickly. You should take time. Discover who you are without crisis or constraint. Travel, if you wish. Build a life entirely your own. But know that whenever you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here. Waiting. Hoping you might choose me. Not because you owe me, but because you want me. Charlotte's vision blurred. She looked down at the bank draft in her hand. Freedom, security, independence. Everything she'd thought she wanted. Then she looked at Edmund, who'd just offered her something infinitely more valuable. Choice without coercion. Do you know what I realized last night? She asked softly. I was furious with you for making decisions for me, but I've been making decisions out of fear. Fear that needing anyone made me weak. Fear that accepting help made me property again. She stepped closer. You didn't save me, Edmund. You gave me space to save myself. Hope flickered in his expression. Charlotte? I'm afraid too, she admitted. Terrified, actually. Because this feels real, and real things can be taken away. But I've spent 6 months being afraid of everything. I'm tired of it. I'm tired of letting Georgiana and that warehouse define what I deserve. She reached up, touching his face with tentative fingers. What if I'm choosing wrong? What if this is gratitude I'm mistaking for love? Edmund covered her hand with his. Then we'll discover it together. And if you realize your feelings aren't what you hoped, I'll let you go. I promise. But Charlotte... His voice dropped to a whisper. Please let yourself find out. She'd spent her life being told who she was. Dutiful daughter. Burdensome stepdaughter. Saleable commodity. For the first time, someone was asking who she wanted to be. Charlotte made her choice. She kissed him. Tentative at first, then with growing certainty as Edmund's arms came around her, holding her as though she were precious but not fragile. The kiss tasted like freedom and possibility, and tomorrow. When they finally parted, Edmund rested his forehead against hers. Was that a yes? Charlotte laughed. That genuine, unfettered sound he'd worked so hard to earn. That was a, let's find out together. I can work with that. Edmund smiled, and Charlotte realized she'd never seen him truly happy until this moment. Though I should warn you, I intend to court you properly. Flowers, poetry, completely insufferable devotion. Sounds dreadful, Charlotte murmured, kissing him again. I accept. 2 weeks later, they married in the chapel at Ashford Hall. Mrs. Copeland wept. Mr. Brennan stood as witness and reported with satisfaction that Georgiana's trial had resulted in imprisonment. Charlotte wore a simple gown of cream silk and carried winter roses from the greenhouse. When the vicar pronounced them married, Edmund kissed his countess with reverence and joy, and Charlotte finally understood the difference between being owned and being cherished. They spent their wedding night in the library, naturally. Charlotte sat curled against Edmund's side, reading aloud from Coleridge while he pretended to listen and actually watched her face, memorizing the way her expressions shifted with the poetry. "You're not paying attention," she accused, looking up. "I'm paying attention to what matters," Edmund countered, pulling her closer. Charlotte set aside the book. "I still can't quite believe this is real, that I'm a countess, that I'm your wife." "Believe it." Edmund kissed her temple. "Because I intend to spend the rest of my life proving it to you." She tilted her face up to meet his gaze. "Do you know what you gave me, Edmund? Not money or titles or rescue. You gave me back myself. You let me be furious and difficult and uncertain. You let me choose. Always," he promised. "Even when your choices involve insisting that Coleridge is superior." Charlotte laughed, the sound filling the library like music. Outside, winter pressed against the windows, but here, wrapped in her husband's arms, surrounded by books and firelight and infinite possibility, Charlotte Hartley, Countess of Ashford, had never felt warmer. She'd been sold as a servant. She'd been bought into freedom. But in the end, she'd simply chosen love. And love, she discovered, was the only thing worth choosing at all.